Rebecca Martinez clutched her swollen belly as she stood in the fluorescent-lit convenience store, her eyes scanning the shelves for something that might settle her churning stomach. At 37 weeks pregnant, everything seemed to trigger her nausea these days. The road trip to her sister's wedding in Denver had been Marcus's idea, and she'd reluctantly agreed, despite her doctor's warnings about long-distance travel this late in pregnancy. Now, standing in this remote gas station somewhere in the middle of Kansas, she wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. Marcus was outside pumping gas into their silver Honda Civic, his phone pressed to his ear as he paced back and forth. Rebecca could see him through the grimy window, gesturing wildly as he spoke. She recognized that stance. It was his work voice, the one he used when dealing with what he called critical client emergencies. Even on their way to her sister's wedding, even with his heavily pregnant wife in the car, Marcus couldn't disconnect from his consulting firm. Rebecca selected a package of saltine crackers and a ginger ale. Hopping the combination would help with the waves of nausea that had been hitting her since they'd left Topeka 2 hours ago. The elderly clerk behind the counter, whose name tag read Earl, gave her a sympathetic smile as she approached. "Due soon?" Earl asked, his weathered hands carefully bagging her items. "Any day now," Rebecca replied, forcing a smile despite the discomfort. "We're traveling to Colorado for my sister's wedding. Probably not the smartest decision, but family is family, you know." Earl nodded knowingly. "My wife traveled right up until she popped with our youngest. Stubborn as a mule, that woman. You be careful out there, though. This stretch of highway can be pretty desolate." Rebecca paid for her items and walked slowly toward the door, her hand supporting her lower back. The baby had been particularly active today, and she could feel little feet pressing against her ribs. As she pushed open the glass door, she expected to see Marcus waiting by the car, ready to help her into the passenger seat and continue their journey. Instead, she watched in disbelief as the Honda pulled away from the pump and accelerated toward the highway. For a moment, she thought Marcus was just moving the car to a different spot, maybe to let someone else access the pump. But as she watched the silver sedan merge onto the interstate and disappear into the distance, reality hit her like a physical blow. Marcus had left her, at a gas station, in the middle of nowhere, while she was 9 months pregnant. Rebecca stood frozen on the concrete, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. The crackers and ginger ale slipped from her numb fingers, the plastic bottle rolling across the pavement. She fumbled for her phone, hands shaking as she dialed Marcus's number. It went straight to voicemail. "You've reached Marcus Patterson. I'm either on another call or away from my phone. Leave a message and I'll get back to you as soon as possible." The casual, professional tone of his greeting made her want to scream. She tried again. Voicemail. Again. Voicemail. On the fourth attempt, she realized he had turned off his phone completely. Rebecca sank onto the metal bench outside the convenience store, her breath coming in short gasps. This couldn't be happening. There had to be some explanation. Maybe he'd received an emergency call and panicked. Maybe he thought she was still in the bathroom. Maybe he'd realize his mistake and come back within minutes, apologetic and embarrassed. 20 minutes passed, then 30. The sun was beginning to set, painting the endless Kansas sky in shades of orange and pink that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. Rebecca had called Marcus's phone 17 times, each call going directly to voicemail. She'd also tried calling her sister Emma, but there was no cell service. The gas station seemed to exist in some kind of dead zone, with only a single bar flickering in and out on her phone. Earl emerged from the store, his shift apparently over. He paused when he saw Rebecca still sitting on the bench, her face pale and drawn. "Everything all right, miss? You've been out here quite a while." Rebecca looked up at him, tears finally spilling over. "My husband, he left me. He drove away and left me here." Earl's expression shifted from concern to anger. He did what now? "I don't know what happened. One minute he was pumping gas, the next minute he was gone. I've been calling him, but his phone is off." Rebecca's voice broke. "I'm supposed to be at my sister's wedding tomorrow. I don't understand how this happened." Earl sat down beside her on the bench, his movements careful and deliberate. "Well, that's about the lowest thing I've ever heard. What kind of man leaves his pregnant wife at a gas station?" He was quiet for a moment, then stood up. "Come on inside. Let's get you somewhere comfortable and figure out what to do next." The convenience store felt like a sanctuary compared to the growing darkness outside. Earl led Rebecca to a small office behind the counter, where he pulled out a folding chair and insisted she sit down. He brought her a bottle of water and a bag of pretzels, refusing to let her pay. "Now," he said, settling into his own chair, "let's talk about getting you where you need to go. You said your sister's wedding is in Denver." Rebecca nodded, wiping her eyes with a tissue Earl had provided. "Tomorrow afternoon, but I don't know how. I mean, I don't have a car, and I can't afford to rent one or take a bus. All our money is in the joint account that Marcus controls." The full scope of her situation was beginning to sink in. She was stranded, pregnant, and essentially penniless. Earl frowned. "What about family? Can someone come get you?" "My sister is getting married tomorrow. My parents are already in Denver helping with the wedding preparations. I can't ask them to drive all the way out here." Rebecca felt another wave of nausea wash over her. "I just don't understand why Marcus would do this. We've been together for 5 years. We're about to have a baby. How could he just leave me here?" "Some people show their true colors when the pressure's on," Earl said quietly. "And having a baby is about as much pressure as life gets." They sat in silence for a few minutes, the hum of the refrigerators and the distant sound of trucks on the highway filling the space. Rebecca closed her eyes and tried to think. She could call the police, but what would she tell them? That her husband had driven away without her. It wasn't technically a crime as far as she knew. She could call a taxi, but she was at least 300 miles from Denver, and the cost would be astronomical. "Earl," she said finally, "is there a motel nearby? Somewhere I could stay tonight while I figure out what to do." Earl shook his head. "Nearest motel is about 40 miles north. But listen, I've got an idea. My daughter lives about 20 miles from here. She's got a spare room and she's real good with pregnant ladies. She's a nurse at the county hospital. Why don't I give her a call?" Rebecca felt a spark of hope. "I couldn't impose like that. I don't even know you." "Sometimes strangers are the best people to help," Earl said, already reaching for his phone. "Besides, my daughter would never forgive me if I left a pregnant woman stranded at a gas station." As Earl made the call, Rebecca found herself thinking about Marcus. They'd met at a coffee shop near her office 3 years ago when she was working as a graphic designer for a small advertising agency. He'd been charming, successful, and seemingly devoted to her. When she'd gotten pregnant, he'd initially been excited about becoming a father. But as the months progressed, she'd noticed changes in his behavior. He became increasingly focused on work, often staying late at the office or taking calls at all hours. He'd also become more controlling about their finances, insisting that she quit her job and let him handle all their money. Now, sitting in this gas station office, Rebecca realized she'd been seeing red flags for months but had chosen to ignore them. The way Marcus dismissed her concerns about money, the way he made major decisions without consulting her, the way he prioritized his work over everything else, including their relationship. "Good news," Earl said, hanging up the phone. "My daughter Corinne is on her way. She'll be here in about 30 minutes. She's also going to bring her husband Dave. He's a mechanic, and he said he'd be happy to drive you to Denver tomorrow morning. Won't cost you a thing." Rebecca burst into tears, overwhelmed by the kindness of these strangers. "I don't know how to thank you." "Just take care of yourself and that baby," Earl said. "And maybe think real hard about whether you want to be married to someone who'd abandon you like this." As they waited for Corinne to arrive, Rebecca found herself opening up to Earl about her relationship with Marcus. She told him about the subtle ways Marcus had been isolating her from her friends and family, how he'd convinced her to quit her job, how he'd gradually taken control of every aspect of their lives. Saying it out loud made her realize how unhealthy their relationship had become. "Sounds like you might be better off without him," Earl said gently. "I know that's hard to hear, especially with a baby on the way, but sometimes life has a way of showing us what we need to see." Headlights appeared in the parking lot and Earl smiled. "That'll be Corinne." A woman in her 30s stepped out of a blue pickup truck, followed by a tall man with grease-stained hands. Corinne had Earl's kind eyes and immediately enveloped Rebecca in a warm hug. "Oh, honey," she said, "what a terrible thing to happen to you. But don't you worry, we're going to take good care of you." Dave, Corinne's husband, shook his head in disgust when he heard what had happened. "I've got 3 daughters," he said. "If anyone ever treated one of them like that, I'd have some words for them." As they helped Rebecca into the truck, she felt a complex mix of emotions: anger at Marcus for abandoning her, gratitude toward these strangers who had shown her more kindness in one evening than Marcus had in months, and underneath it all, a growing sense of strength and determination. Maybe Earl was right. Maybe this was life's way of showing her what she needed to see. The drive to Corinne and Dave's house was quiet, with Rebecca dozing in the back seat. The baby seemed to have settled down, and for the first time all day, she felt relatively comfortable. Corinne had insisted on stopping at a pharmacy to pick up some prenatal vitamins and other supplies, refusing to let Rebecca pay for anything. Their house was a modest ranch-style home with a large front porch and a garden that clearly received a lot of love and attention. Corinne led Rebecca to a cozy guest room with a comfortable bed and a view of the backyard. "You just rest now," Corinne said. "Tomorrow we'll get you to your sister's wedding, and then we'll figure out what comes next." As Rebecca lay in the unfamiliar bed, she placed her hands on her belly and spoke quietly to her unborn child. "I don't know what's going to happen next, little one, but I promise you this: we're going to be okay. And we're going to be surrounded by people who actually care about us." For the first time in months, Rebecca fell asleep feeling hopeful about the future. The next morning, Rebecca woke to the smell of bacon and coffee. For a moment, she forgot where she was and why she was there. Then the events of the previous day came flooding back, and she felt a familiar tightness in her chest. But along with the anxiety came something else, a sense of clarity she hadn't experienced in a long time. Corinne knocked gently on the door. "How are you feeling, sweetheart?" "Better than I expected," Rebecca said, and she meant it. "Thank you so much for everything." "Don't mention it. Dave's already loaded up the truck. He's excited about the road trip. He doesn't get out of town much." Corinne paused. "Have you decided what you're going to tell your family about Marcus?" Rebecca had been thinking about this all night. "The truth, that he abandoned me, and that I'm going to need their help figuring out what to do next." "That takes courage," Corinne said, "but I think you've got plenty of that." The drive to Denver was beautiful, with the Kansas plains gradually giving way to the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. Dave turned out to be an excellent conversationalist, sharing stories about his work as a mechanic and his 3 daughters. Rebecca found herself laughing for the first time in weeks. When they arrived at the hotel where the wedding was being held, Rebecca's parents were waiting in the lobby. Her mother, Patricia, took one look at her daughter's face and knew something was wrong. "Where's Marcus?" she asked. "That's a long story," Rebecca said, then introduced Corinne and Dave. "But these wonderful people made sure I got here safely." As Rebecca explained what had happened, she watched her parents' expressions shift from confusion to anger to fierce protectiveness. Her father, normally a quiet man, was practically vibrating with rage. "He did what?" Patricia said, her voice dangerously quiet. "He left me at a gas station, Mom. Just drove away." Her sister Emma, resplendent in her wedding dress, appeared in the lobby just as Rebecca finished her story. "I'm going to kill him," she said matter-of-factly. "On my wedding day, I'm going to commit murder." "No," Rebecca said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "We're not going to let Marcus ruin your wedding. Today is about you and James and celebrating your love. We'll deal with Marcus later." Emma hugged her sister carefully, mindful of her pregnant belly. "Are you sure you're okay? We can postpone the wedding if you need us to." "Absolutely not," Rebecca said. "I've been looking forward to this day for months. I'm not going to let Marcus take that away from me too." The wedding was beautiful, held in a garden behind the hotel with the mountains as a backdrop. Rebecca stood as Emma's maid of honor, her pregnancy making her movements careful but her smile genuine. As she watched her sister exchange vows with James, she found herself thinking about love and commitment and what those words really meant. During the reception, Rebecca's phone buzzed with text messages from Marcus. She ignored them at first, but eventually curiosity got the better of her. The messages were a bizarre mix of apologies and excuses. "I'm so sorry, babe. I got a call from my biggest client and I panicked. I thought you were still in the bathroom. I drove for 20 minutes before I realized you weren't in the car. I tried to go back, but I got lost. I've been driving around Kansas all night looking for you. Please call me back. I'm worried sick about you." Rebecca showed the messages to her parents and Emma. Her father snorted in disgust. "He's lying," he said. "You don't drive for 20 minutes without noticing your wife isn't in the car." "And even if that were true," Emma added, "he could have called the gas station. He could have called the police. He could have done a dozen things instead of just driving around looking for you." Rebecca knew they were right. Marcus's explanations didn't make sense, and they felt like just another attempt to manipulate her. She turned off her phone and focused on celebrating her sister's happiness. Later that evening, as the reception was winding down, Rebecca found herself talking to Dave and Corinne again. They had stayed for the wedding, insisting they wanted to make sure she was okay before they left. "So what's your plan?" Corinne asked gently. I'm not sure yet, Rebecca admitted. I can't go back to him, I know that much. But I don't have a job, I don't have my own money, and I'm about to have a baby. You've got family, Dave pointed out. That's more than a lot of people have. And you've got strength, Corinne added. I can see it in you. You're going to be just fine. Rebecca's parents had already insisted she come stay with them in Denver until she figured out her next steps. They'd also quietly offered to help her find a divorce lawyer, though they'd been careful not to pressure her about it. As the evening came to an end, Rebecca hugged Corinne and Dave goodbye, tears streaming down her face. I don't know how to thank you, she said. You saved my life. You saved your own life, Corinne replied. We just gave you a ride. After they left, Rebecca sat in her hotel room, her hand resting on her belly. The baby was active again, and she could feel what might have been hiccups. She thought about Marcus, probably sitting in their apartment back in Chicago, crafting more elaborate lies about why he'd abandoned her. She thought about the life they'd built together and how quickly it had all fallen apart. But mostly she thought about the kindness of strangers. Earl, who had sat with her in that gas station office and listened to her story. Corinne, who had opened her home to a complete stranger. Dave, who had driven 300 miles out of his way to help someone he'd never met. These people had shown her what real love looked like. It wasn't about grand gestures or expensive gifts. It was about showing up when someone needed you. It was about putting someone else's needs before your own. It was about being reliable and trustworthy and kind. Marcus had failed every one of those tests. Rebecca picked up her phone and composed a text message to Marcus. She wrote it, deleted it, and wrote it again several times before finally settling on something simple. I'm safe, I'm with my family. Don't contact me again. I'll be in touch through my lawyer. She sent the message and then turned off her phone. Tomorrow, she would start building a new life for herself and her baby. It would be difficult, but she wasn't afraid anymore. She had learned something important in that gas station parking lot. She was stronger than she thought, and there were good people in the world who would help her if she needed it. The next morning, Rebecca woke up to contractions. At first, she thought they were just Braxton Hicks, the false labor pains she'd been experiencing for weeks. But as they became more regular and intense, she realized this was the real thing. "Mom," she called from her hotel room, her voice tight with pain. "I think the baby's coming." The next few hours were a blur of activity. Patricia helped Rebecca pack her things while her father called the hospital. Emma, still glowing from her wedding but now focused entirely on her sister, insisted on coming to the hospital despite the fact that she was supposed to be flying to Hawaii for her honeymoon in a few hours. "The honeymoon can wait," Emma said firmly. "My sister is having a baby." At the hospital, Rebecca was quickly admitted and settled into a labor and delivery room. The contractions were getting stronger, and the doctor estimated the baby would arrive within the next few hours. "Have you tried to reach the father?" one of the nurses asked. Rebecca's parents and Emma exchanged glances. "The father won't be joining us," Patricia said diplomatically. Rebecca was grateful that her family didn't push her to call Marcus. She had no desire to share this moment with someone who had abandoned her when she needed him most. Instead, she focused on the incredible support surrounding her. Her mother held her hand through contractions. Her father paced nervously in the hallway. Emma, still in her wedding dress, refused to leave her side. 8 hours after her labor began, Rebecca gave birth to a healthy baby girl. As the doctor placed her daughter in her arms, Rebecca felt a love unlike anything she'd ever experienced. This tiny person, with her perfect little fingers and her shock of dark hair, was entirely hers. "She's beautiful," Emma whispered, tears streaming down her face. "What are you going to name her?" Patricia asked. Rebecca had thought about this moment many times over the past few months. She and Marcus had discussed names, of course, but they'd never been able to agree on anything. Now, looking down at her daughter, she knew exactly what her name should be. "Hope," she said. "Her name is Hope." The next few days passed in a haze of new parent exhaustion and overwhelming love. Rebecca's parents stayed at the hospital, helping with everything from diaper changes to feeding schedules. Emma had postponed her honeymoon indefinitely, insisting that being there for her sister and new niece was more important than any vacation. Marcus had somehow found out about the birth and had been calling constantly. Rebecca's father had eventually answered the phone and told him in no uncertain terms to stop calling. "You lost the right to be part of this family when you abandoned your pregnant wife," he'd said. "If you want to see your daughter, you can go through a lawyer." Rebecca was grateful for her father's protectiveness, but she was also beginning to realize that she needed to handle Marcus herself. She couldn't let her family fight her battles forever. On her third day in the hospital, Rebecca was nursing Hope when a knock came at the door. She expected it to be another nurse or maybe one of the doctors, but instead, a familiar face peered around the corner. "Corinne," Rebecca said, surprised. "I hope it's okay that I'm here," Corinne said, holding a small wrapped package. "Earl told me you'd had your baby, and I wanted to stop by and see how you were doing." Rebecca burst into tears, overwhelmed by the kindness of this woman who had already done so much for her. "I can't believe you came all this way." "It wasn't far," Corinne said, settling into the chair beside Rebecca's bed. "Besides, I wanted to meet this little one." Rebecca introduced Hope to Corinne, who immediately began cooing over the baby. "She's perfect," Corinne said. "Just perfect." They talked for a while about the birth, about Rebecca's plans for the future, about the legal steps she would need to take regarding Marcus. Corinne listened without judgment, offering advice when asked, but mostly just providing a supportive presence. "I brought you something," Corinne said, handing Rebecca the wrapped package. "It's not much, but I thought you might like it." Inside was a beautiful hand-knitted baby blanket in soft yellow and white. "I made it myself," Corinne said. "I know you're going to be starting over, and I wanted you to have something to remember that there are people who care about you." Rebecca held the blanket against her chest, breathing in the scent of the yarn and the love that had gone into every stitch. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." "You don't need to thank me," Corinne said. "You would have done the same thing for me." After Corinne left, Rebecca sat in her hospital bed with Hope sleeping in her arms, wrapped in the yellow blanket. She thought about the chain of events that had led to this moment. Marcus abandoning her had been one of the worst things that had ever happened to her, but it had also led to some of the best things. The kindness of strangers, the unwavering support of her family, and the realization of her own strength. She also thought about the future. She would need to find a place to live, probably with her parents at first. She would need to find a job that would allow her to support herself and Hope. She would need to navigate the legal system to establish custody arrangements and child support. It would be challenging, but she was no longer afraid. The day Rebecca was discharged from the hospital, she made a decision. Instead of going directly to her parents' house, she asked them to take her to the gas station where Marcus had abandoned her. She wanted to thank Earl properly and to show him that she was okay. The drive back to Kansas took several hours, with Hope sleeping peacefully in her car seat. Rebecca's parents had initially protested the detour, but they'd eventually understood why it was important to her. When they pulled into the gas station parking lot, Rebecca felt a complex mix of emotions. This place had been the site of one of the worst moments of her life, but it had also been where she'd met people who had shown her incredible kindness. Earl was behind the counter when they walked in, and his face lit up when he saw Rebecca. "Well, look at you," he said, coming around the counter to greet them. "And this must be the little one." Rebecca introduced Hope to Earl, who immediately began making silly faces at the baby. "She's beautiful," he said, "just like her mama." "Earl, I wanted to thank you," Rebecca said. "If you hadn't helped me that night, I don't know what would have happened." "You would have figured it out," Earl said. "You're stronger than you think." They talked for a while about the birth, about Rebecca's plans, about Marcus. Earl listened with the same patient kindness he'd shown that first night. "Have you heard from him?" Earl asked. "He's been calling, but I haven't talked to him. My lawyer says he's been asking about visitation rights, but he'll have to prove he's committed to being a father before any judge will grant him access to Hope." Earl nodded. Probably for the best. A man who would abandon his pregnant wife isn't someone you want around your child. As they prepared to leave, Earl walked them out to their car. "You know," he said, "I've been thinking about what happened that night, about how sometimes the worst things that happen to us turn out to be blessings in disguise." Rebecca looked down at Hope, sleeping peacefully in her arms. "I think you might be right. That little girl is going to grow up knowing that her mama is strong and brave, and that there are good people in the world who will help when help is needed. Those are pretty good lessons to learn." As they drove away from the gas station, Rebecca felt a sense of closure. She had faced the place where her old life had ended and her new life had begun. She had thanked the people who had helped her, and she had proven to herself that she was capable of moving forward. The next few months were challenging but rewarding. Rebecca and Hope moved in with her parents temporarily while Rebecca looked for work. She had been afraid that her lack of recent work experience would be a problem, but her portfolio from her graphic design days was still strong, and she was able to find freelance work that allowed her to stay home with Hope. Marcus had indeed hired a lawyer and was pushing for visitation rights. Rebecca's attorney had advised her to be open to some kind of arrangement, but only if Marcus could prove he was stable and committed to being a father. So far, he had shown no evidence of either. 6 months after Hope's birth, Rebecca received an unexpected phone call. It was from a woman named Jennifer, who identified herself as Marcus's ex-girlfriend. "I know this is strange," Jennifer said, "but I felt like I needed to talk to you. I saw the court documents about the custody case, and I wanted you to know that you're not the first woman Marcus has abandoned." Rebecca felt her heart sink. "What do you mean?" "I was with Marcus for 2 years before he met you. I got pregnant, and he promised we'd get married and raise the baby together. But when I was about 7 months along, he just disappeared, packed up his stuff while I was at work and left. I never saw him again." Rebecca's hands were shaking as she held the phone. "What happened to your baby?" "I had a miscarriage at 8 months. The stress of being abandoned, having to work 2 jobs to support myself, the lack of prenatal care because I couldn't afford it. The doctors said it all contributed." Jennifer's voice broke. "I've always wondered if things would have been different if Marcus had stayed." Rebecca felt sick. "I'm so sorry, I had no idea. I've been following the court case because I wanted to make sure he doesn't get to just walk back into your life and pretend to be Father of the Year. If you need me to testify about his pattern of abandoning pregnant women, I'm willing to do it." Rebecca's lawyer was very interested in Jennifer's testimony. It established a pattern of behavior that would be crucial in the custody case. With Jennifer's help, they were able to build a strong case that Marcus was not a fit parent. The custody hearing was scheduled for a cold day in February. Rebecca arrived at the courthouse with her parents and her lawyer, feeling nervous but determined. Marcus was there with his own attorney, looking polished and professional in an expensive suit. During the hearing, Rebecca testified about the night Marcus had abandoned her at the gas station. She spoke about the impact his actions had had on her and on Hope. She talked about the support she'd received from her family and from strangers, and how she'd built a stable life for herself and her daughter. Marcus's testimony was full of excuses and apologies. He claimed he'd been under enormous stress at work. He said he'd made a mistake and that he'd been trying to make amends ever since. He promised he would be a good father if given the chance. But when Jennifer took the stand and testified about her own experience with Marcus, the judge's demeanor changed. It was clear that this was not a man who had simply made one mistake under stress. This was a man who had a pattern of abandoning women when they needed him most. The judge awarded Rebecca full custody of Hope, with no visitation rights for Marcus. The judge also ordered Marcus to pay child support, noting that his financial obligation to his daughter was not contingent on his access to her. As they left the courthouse, Rebecca felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Hope was safe. She was legally protected from Marcus's abandonment and manipulation. They could move forward with their lives without fear. That evening, Rebecca called Corinne to share the good news. They had stayed in touch over the months, and Corinne had become something of a mentor and friend. "I'm so proud of you," Corinne said. "You've handled this whole situation with such grace and strength." "I learned from the best," Rebecca replied. "You and Dave and Earl showed me what it means to be there for someone when they need you. I want to be that kind of person for Hope." "You already are," Corinne said. "That little girl is lucky to have you as her mama." As Rebecca hung up the phone, she looked over at Hope, who was playing with blocks on the living room floor. At 10 months old, she was a happy, healthy baby who laughed easily and seemed to find joy in everything around her. Rebecca thought about the night she'd been abandoned at that gas station. At the time, it had felt like the end of the world. She'd been terrified, alone, and completely uncertain about her future. But that night had also been the beginning of something new. It had been the night she'd learned that she was stronger than she thought, that there were good people in the world, and that sometimes the worst things that happen to us can lead to the best things. She'd kept the yellow blanket Corinne had made for Hope, and she'd told her daughter the story of the kind strangers who had helped them when they needed it most. As Hope grew older, Rebecca would continue to tell her about Earl and Corinne and Dave, about the importance of helping others, about the strength that comes from knowing you can rely on yourself. But for now, she was content to sit on the floor with her daughter, building towers out of blocks and watching them fall down, knowing that no matter what happened next, they would face it together. 1 year after the custody hearing, Rebecca received a letter from Marcus. It was the first contact she'd had with him since the court case, and she almost threw it away without reading it. But curiosity got the better of her, and she opened it. The letter was short and to the point. Marcus had been fired from his job for ethical violations. He was facing bankruptcy and had been forced to move back in with his parents. He was in therapy and claimed to be working on himself. He asked if there was any chance they could try to work things out for Hope's sake. Rebecca read the letter twice, then put it in a drawer. She didn't respond. A few weeks later, she received another letter. This one was from Marcus's mother, asking if she could at least see her granddaughter. Rebecca felt a pang of sympathy for the older woman, but she also remembered what the judge had said about protecting Hope from Marcus's instability. She decided to consult with her lawyer before making any decisions about extended family contact. The lawyer advised her to be cautious, but not to completely close the door on a relationship with Hope's grandmother, provided it could be established that Marcus would not be involved. Rebecca arranged to meet with Marcus's mother, Dorothy, at a neutral location. Dorothy was a kind woman who seemed genuinely heartbroken about her son's actions. "I raised him better than this," Dorothy said, tears in her eyes. "I don't understand how he could have done what he did to you." "I don't understand it either," Rebecca replied. "But I have to protect Hope. She's my priority." Dorothy nodded. "I respect that. I would love to be part of her life if you'd let me. I promise Marcus wouldn't be involved." Rebecca agreed to supervised visits between Dorothy and Hope, with the understanding that any contact with Marcus would end the arrangement immediately. Dorothy was grateful and proved to be a loving grandmother who respected Rebecca's boundaries. As Hope's second birthday approached, Rebecca realized how much her life had changed. She had built a successful freelance graphic design business that allowed her to work from home. She had a strong support network of family and friends. She had a beautiful, healthy daughter who was the light of her life. She also realized that she had never properly thanked Earl, Corinne, and Dave for everything they'd done for her. She decided to plan a trip back to Kansas to visit them and to show them how well she and Hope were doing. The drive to Kansas was very different from the last time she'd made the journey. This time, she was in control. She was driving her own car with her own money, making her own decisions about where to go and when to stop. When she pulled into the gas station parking lot, she felt a rush of emotions. The place looked exactly the same, but she was completely different. Earl was behind the counter, and when he saw her walk in with Hope, his face broke into a huge smile. "Well, look at this little princess," he said, coming around the counter to greet them. "And look at you, Mama, you're glowing." Hope, now walking and talking, was fascinated by Earl's weathered hands and kind eyes. She wasn't shy at all, reaching out to touch his name tag and babbling happily. "She's perfect," Earl said, "just perfect." They spent an hour at the gas station, with Earl showing Hope around and Rebecca updating him on her life. When it was time to leave, Earl walked them to their car. "You know," he said, "I've been working at this gas station for 15 years and I've met a lot of people. But I've never met anyone who impressed me as much as you did that night. You were scared and alone and facing something terrible, but you never gave up hope." Rebecca felt tears prick her eyes. "I almost did give up, if it hadn't been for you and Corinne and Dave."